Well, let me thank all of the witnesses for your testimony. Let me ask a question perhaps to all panelists. And you may want to answer it or not, but and I'll probably do that with most of the questions unless it gets to specific USAID questions, and I'll certainly relate it to you. In March of last year, our subcommittee heard testimony from witnesses who warned of the current electoral crisis. As noted in today's testimony, these elections were marred by violence, reports of fraud, and logistical gaps. Yet, even if the electoral irregularities and other flaws had not emerged, administrating elections of this scale in this country with little infrastructure was going to be challenging without these other problems. As it's been mentioned, more than 31 million registered voters, estimated 19,000 candidates for 500 parliamentary seats, 11 candidates for presidency, country about 1/4 the size of the United States. To what extent, if at all, do these elections represent a setback for democracy and moving forward in the DRC? And do you believe that the problems would the outcome be the same if these election fraud were not committed? In other words, was it enough, in your opinions, to change the outcome of the election? We do know, and it's clear, that there were many problems. The question basically is, do you believe that the outcome would have been different without these problems? Ambassador?
Thank you, Congressman Payne. From the 2006 elections, where some of us were there as election observers and looked at the process, it was almost entirely managed and paid for by the international community. And the feeling was that for the ownership and for the people of the Congo, that they want to take ownership of this process. And so the next election, this second election, had a much more integrated dynamics that the Congolese would be the authority on this electoral process. And so is it a setback? It's one step in the process of the democratic process in the Congo. It's an issue that the people of the Congo wanted, and it's something that we would support, that we had supported. We started the process of supporting this election earlier, back in 2008 and 2009, with the IFES and later on with the Carter Center. But was that enough sufficient funds? And of course the answer is there's not always sufficient funding to do that. But this was a step that we took. The other issue too is that if you look at the elections, this election compared to the 2006 elections, you didn't have the violence that was marred after those elections with the problems of militias by Bemba, Kabila, and other groups. Here the death toll was unacceptable, but not to the level that we saw in 2006. As far as the results of the election, we were very clear from the outset, I think all of us were, in the international community, that these elections were not transparent, the lack of transparency, and did not measure up to the democratic gains that made in other African elections. However, whether these irregularities would have been sufficient enough to have changed the outcome of those elections it still is unclear. But the issue is that the process has begun, and that through our commitment after the election by Secretary Clinton and the State Department, we are committed to ensuring that the electoral process will continue to progress and address the needs and build the trust and confidence of the people of the Congo.
Okay. The electoral body does not, committee does not have the National Congo Independent National Election Commission, does not have any civil society, I believe, on that. commission. And I wonder if you believe that for civil society to be a part of that CENI would improve, or CEMCO would improve, well, it is CENI, would improve the confidence that the people of the Congo would have in that body.
I'll defer to my colleagues, but overall the CENI reflects the process established, and of course how the CENI is established, etc., will be for the Congolese to determine, but I defer to you.
Obviously, the CENI is established under a statutory authority, and so the way it's established is part of the law. But I think in general, our approach has been not only in the Congo, but elsewhere around the world to encourage the participation of civil society and to encourage governments to make civil society partners, particularly in electoral processes where the credibility of processes can be enhanced to the extent that civil society is participating. I think that what your question speaks to to a more general challenge that lies ahead in the Congo, and building off your last question in terms of whether this was a setback. Certainly, it wasn't a step forward, and in order to move forward, there is not only the challenge of improving the execution of elections, but also mitigating the political tensions that have arisen. And one of the ways that the political problems can be solved is by making a more inclusive process across the board. So engaging with civil society on the part of the CENI would be one example of how that might be executed.
Dr. Mendelson, as you know, a team of international election experts from the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, IFES, as we all know, the National Democratic Institute, the NDI, was in the DRC from January the 5th to the 13th, assessing the feasibility of conducting a review of the results of the November 28th legislative elections. Please describe in detail the results of IFES and NDI assessment, and how feasible are the proposed recommendations that they made.
So in Secretary Clinton's statement on December 20th, she said, "We believe a review of the electoral process by the Congolese authorities and outside experts may shed additional light on the causes of the irregularities, identify ways to provide more credible results, and offer guidance for the ongoing election results and for future elections." So we funded a small team from IFES and NDI for a scoping mission to ascertain if a more comprehensive assessment was feasible. We were very clear that we would not play any role in validating or certifying electoral results or processes. The government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo allowed the team to meet with a range of stakeholders, and the CENI, in particular, allotted significant time to spend with this team. But unfortunately, the types of activities that the GDRC was hoping that the team would undertake were not in line with the team's priorities. So by the end of the time in the DRC, it was clear that a more comprehensive assessment would not be feasible. To your specific question, there has not been a detailed assessment done, and they have not published specific recommendations.
Let me ask this to Assistant Secretary Yamamoto. According to the official results, as we know, upheld by the Supreme Court on December 16th, Kabila have gotten 49% of the vote, while Tshisekedi received 32%. Tshisekedi has refused to accept these results and has inaugurated himself as president. Tshisekedi has also called for the cancellation of all legislative results, and the opposition is reportedly organizing mass protests for February the 16th. In your opinion, what can we do to assess that Congo does not descend into further conflict and instability as a result of the flawed elections? How likely is it that a standoff between President Kabila and opposition leader Tshisekedi will escalate into mass violence in the coming weeks or months? What is the current status of the mediation efforts between the government and opposition, and what impact, if any, has this electoral dispute had on regional stability? As we know, the Great Lakes region is very fragile.
And thank you, Congressman. And the issue for us is that we have been in close discussions, private discussions, with Assistant Secretary Johnny Carson, our Ambassador Jim Entwistle, and his deputy Sam Lakely out in Kinshasa, with every part of the opposition, particularly Mr. Tshisekedi, as well as President Kabila, Malunda from the Seni, and all aspects. In respect to your question, the issue is that on the short term, to avoid problems from escalating beyond where they are now, is that there has to be open political dialogue first, and also communications to ensure that there is transparency not only in the process but also in the discussions. We also have called and moved forward in discussions privately on opening more political space, ensuring that the opposition and all people have the right to express their wills, but also responsibly express those wills without violence, and also to have a commitment from all parties that they will not commit themselves or that they would avoid violence, etc. And so in the short term is dialogue, communications, open political space, and over the long term is much more technical assistance and commitment to capacity building. What does this pertain for the regional stability in the area, and to your last question, is that all of the countries are clearly focused on what happens in the Congo, but also what's happening in neighboring countries, from Burundi to Congo, Brazzaville, etc. Our special advisor, Barry Walkley, is currently in discussions with the regional leaders, and that's important to work with our ambassadors to get their views, and also to bring better communications and dialogue so that it doesn't spiral out and that there is a confidence building among the participants in this region. Thank you.